It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Thomas Reed pulled a dusty box from the back of his attic. Inside were memories too painful to face photos, drawings, birthday cards, and a high school yearbook from 1990. He hadn't opened it in over 2 decades, not since the day his 14-year-old daughter Emily vanished without a trace. One minute she was walking home from a friend's house. The next, she was gone. No witnesses, no leads, just silence that stretched on for years. Swallowing up hope and leaving behind questions no one could answer, Thomas had replayed that day in his mind thousands of times. The police had done their best. The town came together, but as time passed, the search faded. People moved on, but Thomas never did. Not really. And now, 22 years later, something in him nudged him back to that yearbook. Maybe it was grief, maybe curiosity, but what he found in those pages made his hands go cold. On a page toward the back, filled with candid shots and student clubs, he spotted a face. It looked like Emily. Same smile, same dimples. But it wasn't. From 1990, it was from a class that graduated years later. Heart-pounding, Thomas turned the page. Was it just a look-alike? Or something more? A piece of a puzzle he never thought he'd find. He couldn't know then that this small discovery would unlock a trail of secrets buried deep in the town's history and lead him somewhere he never expected to go. Thomas stared at the photo for what felt like hours. The girl in the yearbook wasn't listed by name. It's just a caption that read, Science Club, minus 1,996. That couldn't be right. Emily would have been 20 by then. She should have been in college, not high school. Still, the resemblance was too strong to ignore. Same hairline, same little freckle near the eye, and the expressions somehow both familiar and distant. Thomas took a photo of the page and zoomed in, comparing it to one of Emily's school portraits. His breath caught. It wasn't just similar. It looked like the same person, only older. He took the yearbook to the local library the next day, hoping to find out more about that school year. The librarian, Mrs. Hawthorne, remembered Emily's disappearance all too well. The whole town did. It was one of those stories that never really went away, just got quieter. When Thomas showed her the photo, her face changed. She didn't say it, but something unsettled her. That girl was quiet, she finally said, tapping the page, kept to herself. I always thought she seemed out of place. Out of place. The words echoed in his mind. If Emily had somehow survived, where had she been? Why hadn't she come home? And if it wasn't her, why did this stranger look exactly like his missing daughter? Questions spun in his head, and he knew he couldn't stop now. Something was hiding behind that photo, and someone in town might know exactly what. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been hiding something for a very long time. That yearbook photo opened a door he never expected to walk through again. He started asking around former teachers, retired school staff, even some of Emily's old classmates who had stayed in town. Most were polite but distant, giving vague answers or claiming not to remember that girl in the 1996 photo. A few looked uncomfortable, like they wanted to say something but didn't dare. That only deepened his suspicion that there was more to this than coincidence. One former janitor, Mr. Leary, finally agreed to meet with Thomas in private. He looked nervous, his eyes darting as he lowered his voice. I remember her, he whispered. She wasn't on any class list. No records, no paperwork. Just showed up one semester, then gone the next. It was like she never existed. Detail hit Thomas hard. It didn't make sense. Schools don't just let unknown kids wander into classes unnoticed. Someone had to be covering for her. But why? And how could a girl identical to Emily end up enrolled in school 6 years after her disappearance? The deeper Thomas looked, the more twisted the trail became. Records missing, teachers transferred. Even the principal from that year had left suddenly without explanation. What started as a faded photograph was now leading Thomas into something. Bigger, something that had touched more lives than just his own. And it felt like someone didn't want the truth getting out. Thomas kept following the trail, no matter how strange it got. Each lead seemed to take him further away from what he thought he knew about Emily's disappearance. He drove out to the old middle school building, now abandoned, where that yearbook photo had been taken. The place was falling apart, windows, shattered desks covered in dust, but something about it felt frozen in time. He wandered the halls, stopping at room 214, the science classroom. A rusted plaque still hung by the door with a name he didn't recognize: Ms. Claire Bennett. The name hadn't come up in any of the staff records he found. Curious, he searched local property records and tracked her to a small cabin on the edge of town, nearly swallowed by trees. He knocked. No answer. But he noticed the curtains shift slightly. Someone was inside. Later that night, he got a call from an unlisted number. The voice on the other end was older, shaky. "You're looking for the truth. Stop. It won't bring her back." Then the line went dead. That was the breaking point. Someone knew what had happened. Someone had seen. Horror helped her. And they were still out there, watching Thomas inch closer to answers. He returned to the library, this time digging through old newspapers and police reports from 1990 to 1996. Tucked deep in the archives was a brief article: local school investigated for enrollment discrepancies. It was dated only days after Emily's photo appeared in that yearbook. Thomas knew then he was right in the middle of something far darker than he ever imagined. As Thomas flipped through the old newspaper clipping, something caught his eye that made his stomach turn. Buried in the same article about the school's enrollment investigation was a name he hadn't seen in years: Principal Marjorie Lane. She had abruptly left the school district in 1996, and no one seemed to know where she'd gone. But there it was in print. Lane cited for internal review involving off-record student files. A few days later, she resigned. It wasn't just a coincidence anymore. This woman might have held the key to Emily's disappearance. He managed to track her down in a nearby state, now living under a different last name. She reluctantly agreed to meet him in a public park, and when they finally sat down, her hands were trembling. She wouldn't say much, but she did slip Thomas an envelope. "I was told never to speak of this," she said quietly. "But I've carried it for too long." Inside the envelope were photocopies of files, photos, attendance logs, notes scribbled in the margins. One page stood out. It had Emily's name at the top, but under a different alias. "Placement arranged. No further. Contact," it read, and scrawled beneath that, in a rushed hand, "Special Custody Private Program." That phrase alone was enough to freeze Thomas in place. What kind of program? Who arranged it? And why? He realized then Emily's disappearance wasn't random. It had been orchestrated, and the people behind it had the power to erase records and rewrite lives. Thomas followed the trail. The envelope opened. The phrase "Special Custody Private Program" led him to an old foster facility that had operated under a non-profit shell in the early 90s, just outside the county lines. On paper, it was a home for vulnerable children. In reality, it had a darker purpose, funded by a group that placed children into private care under new identities. Sometimes with parental consent, other times through legal loopholes and quiet removals. Emily had been one of them. A former employee confirmed what Thomas feared. Emily had arrived in late 1990 under a different name, placed there after someone filed papers claiming Thomas was unfit due to mental instability. The signature on the document wasn't his. It was his late wife's, filed just weeks before her car accident. And she had ties to the very nonprofit that funded the program. Emily had lived there for nearly 4 years, before being moved again this time, to a family across the country. She'd never been told her real name. She'd believed her parents had given her up. That photo in the yearbook, taken during a brief return visit to the area with her new guardians. A rare, unplanned moment that somehow slipped into the school's print. As Thomas pieced it together, the truth hit like a wave. Emily was alive. She'd lived a whole life believing she was someone else. He had her current name now, her address. But just as he prepared to make contact, he received a letter. One line, asterisk, she doesn't know you exist. Asterisk. Thomas stood on the sidewalk across from a quiet suburban house, hands in his coat pockets, watching as a woman stepped out to collect her mail. She looked just like Emily, older, of course, but there was no mistaking her. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she scanned the street like she was always waiting for something. She didn't recognize him. How could she? She'd lived a life built on a different name, different memories. Everything she knew had been carefully rewritten. He never crossed the street. He never knocked on the door. Not yet. Instead, Thomas went home and began writing a letter not just to Emily, but to the person she believed she was. He poured years of heartache, the truth behind her disappearance, and the story no one ever dared to tell. He didn't want to shatter her world, but hoped to give her a chance to rediscover it, if she ever chose to. In the end, it wasn't about justice or revenge. It was about reconnecting the pieces of a broken past and leaving behind something honest. Emily's story had been buried under lies, and now it had finally come to light.